Hello everyone. So I'm making this video to talk about happiness. Now, happiness is something that a lot of people talk about, like anybody, psychologists, spiritual gurus, the obsession, the idea with the search for happiness, or the idea of deserving happiness, or if you do this, you will be happy, blah, 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 blah. So I will propose a completely different approach. And if you have seen my other videos, again, I'm going to talk about stories, the stories, the mental conditioning, the story in our head that we superimpose to reality. We create an extra layer in between us and reality with those stories, and then we judge reality based on those stories. So what is happiness? Well, again, happiness is a story. So what is that story about? So for example, in Italian, which comes from Latin, the word for happiness is felicità. And felicità comes from the word felix in Latin, which means lucky. So the root of the word happiness, at least the Latin root, is lucky. So I guess it's that feeling when you feel lucky. So you play the roulette and you win. This kind of excitement, this kind of good feeling. Something lucky happens to you. Something kind of unexpected, because if luck is involved, it has to be unexpected. I mean, if it was expected, then it means that luck was not involved. So it implies non-expectation. You play the roulette, you don't expect to win. You play the lottery, you don't expect to win. You buy some stock and it goes up a lot, maybe more than you expected, you did not expect it. So lucky is something good that you did not expect. And unlucky, it's its opposite, something bad that you did not expect. So you bet on the red, comes the red, you're lucky, comes the black, you're unlucky in the roulette. So, first of all, if this is the root, if this is the true meaning of the word, if this is the story of what that word means, is it something that can be sustained, ongoing? Because some people expect that maybe they could or they should always feel happy. But if happy is that feeling that comes when you are lucky, that is, it implies some kind of non-expectation, of not expecting it. Can it be constant? Well, of course you could be always lucky. You could go to the casino, play the roulette, and it always comes out whatever color you bet. But that's very unlikely. That's unrealistic. So let's say you're a billionaire, but you're used to it. That's your day-to-day life. So you're not going to feel lucky. I mean, you may feel lucky that you have reached that point, that you have reached a billion or that level of success or whatever. But you will get used to it. So then you will make some investments, some other bets, etc., etc. And then again, if you're lucky, then you will feel the happiness, the luckiness. And if you're unlucky, you will feel the unluckiness or the unhappiness. But that's the root of the word. So it's that feeling that you experience when something lucky, which means unexpected, happens to you. You feel happy. So yeah, it describes a feeling that most likely cannot be sustained. It's not something that you can feel all the time. Because there are certain things that you can feel all the time. Let's say it's hot. I mean, if you put the heating very hot, it's going to feel hot. You may get used to it a little bit, but it's still going to feel hot. Even if you keep it for 10 years, hot, it's going to feel hot. And if you put it cold, it's going to feel cold. If a noise is loud, it will feel loud even for a long time. If a light is bright, it will feel bright for a long time. Now, you may get used to it a little bit, but it's not connected with an expectation. Whereas the word happiness comes from the idea that it's unexpected. But if it keeps repeating, then it's probably expected. So it's not a state, this idea that you can reach some state of constant whatever. They use some weird words like samadhi, I think, or nirvana, or constant joy, constant happiness. What does that even mean? I mean, sure, maybe someone can induce a specific state. So maybe someone is able, by going in a deep meditation, to feel an extremely strong sense of something. But that would be kind of no different than using a drug. Yeah, you don't use the chemicals of the drug, sure, but you're basically inducing a state through some process, through some trick, to feel in a certain way. It's just an induced state. Now, can you induce the state of happiness? I'm not sure. Maybe. But clearly, that state is only there while it's being induced. So if some monk, very experienced in meditation, can induce a state of great joy while meditating, sure. But most likely, as soon as his meditation is over, then that state is over, because it's just an induced state. Now, why and what sense it will make that someone constantly feel this feeling? I mean, how could they live their daily life? So it's like, if someone is always happy, let's say he has to buy a house, and he's always going to be happy, so he's probably going to make a bad deal. It's like the seller tried to scam him, and he's going to he's going to smile, and then lose all his money. So I mean, can you be functional and be always happy, or in that state of pure joy, whatever? Probably not. I mean, it's bad for your survival. There are cases of people that they don't experience pain. They do not experience physical pain at all. So let's say if they put their hand on the stove, on the hot stove, they don't feel anything. But then their hand will still burn. And actually, it's very, very dangerous condition, because let's say they touch something that is very hot, they don't feel any pain, so they keep holding it. Their hand starts to burn, they get infected, and they may need to amputate the hand. Or maybe they break their leg, they don't notice it. So they have a very high chance of dying potentially if they are not extra careful, because pain is a signal that something is wrong. Of course, there are cases where unfortunately pain becomes a negative thing, like let's say when you have chronic pain and you cannot do anything because of intense chronic pain. It's terrible, of course. But then if you feel no pain at all, it's also terrible, because you will probably not live long. You will lose your arms, your legs. You may just stare at the sun and go blind, because you don't feel any pain. And then you will feel some sort of different pain. You will feel some kind of mental pain because of the limitations that you have. Now you have lost your hands, you have lost your eyes, I mean, you have lost your ears, because maybe you expose yourself to a very loud sound for a long time and you don't feel any pain. So it's not great. So if you live in that state of constant joy or happiness or whatever, it's not functional. You will not survive, you will not make it, you will always be happy, so you will probably get scammed, you will lose all your money, you cannot really interact with other people. I mean, you have to set boundaries when you interact with people. Sometimes you have to be antagonistic when it makes sense too. You cannot always be smiling and ha 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 ha. It's not going to work. It's not going to last. Of course, you can induce a state. Probably, I have no experience in that, but I suspect that it's true that some people can induce a state through meditation, a deep state where they feel some good feeling. Sure, just like you can use drugs and induce a similar feeling. Some people can do it without drugs. I'm not sure if it's such an important distinction. The point is, it's still an induced state. It's not their normal life. It's not the normal way in which they operate. They have to induce this state. So, but the thing I want to say is, happiness is a story. So what happens? Because here I can speak from personal experience. What happens when someone drops the conditioned mind? What happens when someone drops the stories? What happens when someone reaches enlightenment? That is just dropping the conditioned mind, dropping the conditionings in our mind, dropping the stories. That is enlightenment. It's not some metaphysical, mystical thing. It's dropping the stories. So what happens when you reach enlightenment? Do you feel always happy? Well, yes and no. So what is it? Well, when you reach enlightenment, is not that you feel happy, it's that you realize that happiness is just a story. It's a made up, imagined story that you should always be in a certain state that resembles the state of what you feel when you're lucky. Um, and it's the idea that you should always be in that state. So it's a should, it's a story. The world should be like this. It's an imagined reality. And so what you do is you project, you superimpose this imagined reality between you and reality, and you compare reality with the story that you should always be happy. And of course, it doesn't happen because the happiness is the feeling of being lucky. It cannot be constant. So if you believe that you could or you should always feel happy, then you will just judge reality compared to the story and feel miserable. So reaching enlightenment, dropping the conditioned mind, doesn't mean you will always feel happy. It just means that you will realize that happiness is just a story, especially the idea that you should always be happy. Of course, sometimes you feel happy when something lucky happens. You win the lottery, you are happy. You win at the roulette, you're happy. Something unexpected and positive happens, you're happy. But it cannot be constant by definition if it's the feeling of something that happens when something lucky happens. But the story will be that you should always feel that feeling of happiness. And that's just a story. You superimpose the story that you should always feel happy on top of reality, and then you look at reality through that story, and you judge reality by saying, but I'm not always happy, and then you feel miserable. But the trick is not that there is some magical trick to always constantly feel happy. The trick is to realize that the idea that one should constantly feel happy is just a story, and to remove the story. Now, if you remove the story, you do not believe that you should always be happy. You do not believe that this is the right state and you have to reach some specific achievement, blah, 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 in order to always feel happy. You don't believe that you have to reach some kind of enlightenment or spiritual whatever, that so finally you can always feel happy. You don't believe that because it's the story. You drop the story. And so what happens when you drop the story? Well, it's just you and experience, you and reality. There is no story in between. You don't wonder if you should be happy or not. You're just there. There is just no judgment. Now, does that effectively make one feel happy? Well, for sure you feel much better because those judgments, those constant judgments that your mind makes when you believe in the stories usually make you feel miserable. So for sure, once you drop the conditioned mind and you reach enlightenment, you feel a lot less miserable. But just because you have removed the judgments, what was making you feel miserable are the story that produced judgment, including the story that you should always feel happy. Because if you don't feel happy at some point in time, but you believe that you should always feel happy because you have the story of I should always be happy, then if at any point you're not super happy, you're like, oh my God, this is terrible, I'm not super happy. What's wrong? You start to make a judgment. And so you feel miserable. But the issue is the judgment. The issue is the story. When you drop the story, it's just you and reality. There is no story in between. There is no judgment. There is no comparison between what is being experienced and what you think should be experienced based on your story. You have removed this imagined reality that you use to compare reality with imagination. So you're not judging. You're not saying, I should always be happy. And then if you're not, you feel miserable. So you may not feel always happy, but you don't feel miserable. So it's more like in between. Maybe calm would be a better word, but not always, because if some big emergency happens, you will not be calm. You will engage with it because it's the reasonable thing to do. So again, it should not become a story that I should always be calm. No, it's not about adding new stories that you should always be happy, you should always be calm, or even you should always be more engaged with reality. Those should be the natural state. First of all, there is no should, but those ideally would end up being the natural state once you have removed the stories. So once you remove the story that you should always be happy, that you should always be calm, and that you should always engage, then you may very well be calm most of the time, not feel miserable, and engage more directly. But not because it's a story that makes you do it. It's removing the stories will bring you to a more natural, whatever that means, state where you just don't care about the story. There is just reality, and reality is just what is it, and you engage with it without judging it. And so you remove all this judgment that makes you feel miserable. But that's all that is effectively happening. So the idea of happiness, or that one should always be happy, is just a story. So it's not that one should follow some kind of spiritual path, in quotes, whatever that means, to reach constant happiness. No, the only path that is actually interesting is dropping the stories, dropping all this nonsense, dropping all this extra layer in between us and reality that make us judge reality and stop feeling miserable because of the judgments our mind makes. But again, you cannot do this by forcing yourself not to judge. That will be another belief, that you should force yourself not to judge. No, you have to realize that the stories are just stories, and once you realize they are just stories, they poof, they drop, they lose all their power, and clearly you're not going to judge them. You're not going to judge reality based on those stories. So you don't, when you get some gifts at Christmas, you don't say, oh, Santa Claus should have given me better gifts, because you don't believe in Santa Claus. You don't have to force yourself to not judge. It's automatic. Once you realize that a story is just a story, poof, it drops. It loses all its power, and you stop judging. It's the natural consequence of dropping the story.